This is my first time ever streaming, and I'm trying to bring to light an issue that happened to me not too long ago. I was working for a company here in Victoria, British Columbia, and for 5 years I worked for this company, and every year I asked whether or not we were working with lead paint. And for every year, I got at least 1 to 2 answers saying, no, we were not working with lead paint. That's way older houses. Don't worry about it. And this year was the first year I found out that I was working with lead. I was working at a house, and the homeowner came out and told me, hey, have you heard the story about the house that you're working with? I said, no, I've never heard the story. Please tell me. And she told me, and she said this house was, the bottom was from the 1950s and the top was from the 1800s. And it was moved from down the road and put on top of their foundation. And I said, well, what did the lead test say? Because that's 1800s, that's pretty old. And she said she had no clue about a lead test. So I contacted my employer and I asked him, what did the contractor's lead test say? And he said that he knew nothing about that and that he'd get back to me. 2 days later, he shows up at the job site and he tells me that we should assume all houses have lead paint in them and that Brad Macdonnel has never done a lead test ever, and that we should just assume all has lead paint. But that goes against the last 4 years in which I was told we were not working with lead paint. And for the last 4 years out of the 5 years I've been working for him, I've been having intense stomach pain, growing and growing and growing. And I have a high risk of colon cancer in my family. So for the last 4 years, I've been spending all my energy trying to figure out whether or not I had colon cancer. I've had 3 surgeries in the last 4 years searching for colon cancer, including in which one surgery they botched it up and they forgot to give me pain medication inside my IV. They stuck the IV in and forgot the actual medication. And I had to do one of those surgeries without any pain meds. And so I find out that, yes, it's lead, and that possibly my stomach pain might be connected to that. So after finding out this, I get a blood test. And it's only the first week into the season. And my blood test came back at 0.90, and WCB's actionable offense is 0.97. So I'm off by a 0.07, and I'm going through the hardest time with WCB. And the more I find out about lead, the more I find out that blood tests are actually, I think, in my opinion, one of the least accurate ways of judging whether or not someone's being affected by lead. It gives a great accuracy for blood levels, for immediate exposure, but it gives no reading for anybody who's been poisoned over long term. And I was told by 2 MDs that I was fine. And that's because they were going by a number that was given to them by WCB. And the receptionist, even for one of those doctors, told me I was fine before I even talked to the doctor. And then I end up checking the CDC, checking all these other sites, and looking into lead more myself. And I found out that I was not okay, and that number was not right. It's an inaccurate way to judge whether someone's being poisoned by lead. And so I end up going and spending $400 of my own money and getting a live urine test to get a heavy metal test done on my body. And that's so I can find out how much lead has been absorbed into my bones. Because for many of you that don't know, lead, once it goes into your body, into your blood, it goes into your bones. And then it stays there for about 10 years, 10, 12 years. And it only stays in the blood for 1 month and at most 2. And that's that's depending on your body weight, how good your digestion is, how good how well you're eating, like fruits and vegetables. That will determine how fast it moves through your system. But 1% of all lead that goes into your body goes into your bones. And so I get this test, and then I find out that I have 75 times the normal amount of lead in my body than the average human. And the doctor told me that it was the second highest reading she's ever seen in her career. And that the person who was not too far off from my reading was actually getting misdiagnosed with Parkinson's disease because of the amount of lead tremors he was getting. And I am just starting to get lead tremors myself now. And for me to have to fight so hard and to get no help from WCB at all, zero financial support from them at all right now. And their whole motto seems to be you have the right to refuse unsafe work. And I literally, the last day I worked was the day I made the claim to WCB. And I had to argue with my case manager several times that I was fired for going to WCB because he kept telling me that I couldn't be fired for going to WCB. And because I was arguing with him so much, he didn't even activate a case suppression officer because he was unaware. It was the first time he ever dealt with somebody being fired by for going to WCB. And his supervisor actually apologized for that and apologized for the fact that he was a month late activating a case suppression officer to look into my case of the fact that I was fired for going to WCB. And right now, I'm dealing with prohibited action. I'm dealing with like 9 different organizations trying to get this dealt with. And like WCB just seems to be the most heartless and cruel organization I've ever had to deal with. Like the amount of times I've thought about suicide since dealing with WCB, at least a dozen, I'd have to say. And if I didn't have my girlfriend to be able to like emotionally support me through this time, I definitely wouldn't be here right now. And it really makes me think about all the other people that don't have that kind of support to get that kind of support. And the fact that one of the job sites that I worked at, and it causes me a lot of emotional grief and guilt, this, and one of the job sites I worked at, there was at least 8 to 12 children there. And they were ages from 3 to 8. And if I lived through the amount of pain every single day because of lead in my stomach, like I was keeled over, sweat dripping down my head because of the amount of pain I was in. You don't have no idea. Like I was in, every morning I prayed I would die because it was just so much pain. And then I got that heavy metal test and went through chelation. I've been now over a month without stomach pain after living with stomach pain for 4 years. And the fact that there's possibly a dozen children out there who were at risk of a high amount of lead exposure during that job because they were walking through our lead dust, walking up to have their meals, putting their hands on the railing. And then, I think they wash their hands, but child washing their hands compared to a human or compared to an adult washing their hands, it's a big difference. It's usually just a rinse. And I'm really worried about the amount of lead that they could have in their bodies and the amount of pain that they could actually be enduring because of that amount of lead. And when I mentioned this to WCB, they told me that they weren't interested in looking into the past, even though this was only 3 years ago. And the more I look into WCB, the more I realize that they should be renamed the EPP, the Employers Protection Plan, because they're already trying to like tell me that I should head back to work because I should try to lessen the amount of cost that my employer might have to pay me for this case. And like WCB is supposed to be an arbitration for both the employer and the employee. And if my lawyer came to me and said that, hey, I think we should try and get this case done faster, and I think you should get back to work to save your employer money, I'd fire that lawyer in a second. Because in my mind, I want to get as much money as I can out of this because of the amount of pain I've suffered, the possible amount of pain I'm going to suffer in the future. The fact is that we're only looking at lead right now. The amount of other chemicals that could have been in that paint when I thought we were doing lead tests, like there's asbestos, there's carcinogens, there's lead, there's many other things. And like asbestos, for example, there's no real reading for that. I'll just eventually get mesothelioma and then die in 10 years. So how do you really put a price tag on the fact that if you look up lead, it tells you that you have a 95, like for the amount of lead I've had, you have a 95% increased mortality rate. So in my mind, I've lost possibly decades of my life, and they're telling me I should go to work and lessen the cost to my employer. I right now have like a dozen pills that I have to take every day in order to get through this. I have to take a 3 month, like I originally did a 3 day chelation cycle. And that's how I found out I had 75 times the amount of lead. And during that 3 day cycle, I was having extreme side effects to the point that I thought I was having a heart attack. And now I have to do a 3 month cycle of chelation. And to try and hope to get most of this lead out of my body. Anyways, that's WorkSafe BC. I'll leave it there and I'll end this and I'll get back to you guys with another stream.